Okay, so people can come in later, I guess, or not, whatever. I'm Alex Wilson, Alexis. This is from Cuckold To Raceplay, Implications of Fetishizing Race. Hope you guys are in the right place. I guess just some brief intros of myself and then the topic and kind of why I wanted to do this. So I'm from DC. I work at a harm reduction service there called HIPS that does a lot in the way of sex worker advocacy and decriminalization of sex work and decriminalization of syringes. So my job specifically, I work a lot with injection drug users. I'm the overdose response specialist. So that just means that I'm working with people to give out a drug called naloxone. In the event that you overdose, you administer this drug and it immediately reverses it. That's not really relevant to why I'm here, but that's just, a little bit about me. So I often have to ask myself, am I a sex educator? And then on the one hand, I say well, I guess I spend a lot of time thinking and writing about sex and engaging in dialogues about sex and sexuality. But then I have imposter syndrome. So I'm oh no, I'm no educator. I'm no expert, right? But I kind of was sitting and thinking, and for a long time I did a lot of work with fantasy and BDSM and research regards to that. So when I was in undergrad, I did a linguistics paper about how power is established in different BDSM dynamics in erotica. So basically that just means that I went to the library and read a shit ton of BDSM porn and then wrote about it, which culminated in this really great experience wherein I just printed a bunch of different documents. I was on Literotica mainly, if you guys are familiar with that platform. And I just printed a bunch of documents. So when you're in college, you can't just print, you have to send something to a printer, then scan your ID. As luck would have it, I went to the printer and none of my jobs were there. So I got to go to the front desk attendant and I was listen, I printed 30 papers. They're gonna sound really weird, but I promise this is for school. He's yeah, whatever. So he pulls it up and it's Daddy's cum slut 24, dirty spank me pants. And he was I was listen, you can call Dr. Epstein. I promise this is real research. I just need to get these jobs done and then I'll be out of the library, not looking at porn anymore. He's yeah, okay, whatever, get the fuck out. But he did print the jobs, so I was grateful for that. But anyway, I guess, genesis of this particular project was me thinking about fantasy and what I've seen and looking at porn. And I think within the frame of sex positivity, as this permeates social consciousness more and more, we're having really good dialogues about what it means to be sex positive, but I feel sex positivity also fails us in a lot of ways, right? I feel if we're viewing sex positivity to mean that we should just blanketly look at all things sexual and support them, that's kind of setting us up for failure. So I've always wondered, what are the ways I can push back on this, and what are the ways I can kind of look at this and say, this makes me feel not so positive about myself, right? And where do we have a platform to kind of speak about those experiences? So just to warn, we're going to be talking a lot about really racist things and racism, and I know that can be jarring for a lot of people, and things will get more explicit later on. So if you have to take a break or step out, I won't fault you. I definitely understand. If you want me to move on from a particular topic, I understand. So that's kind of what you can expect from this presentation. It's just really frank discussions about race and race in pornography and how mainstream pornography portrays race. I will add that stipulation. This is mainstream pornography. I'm not talking about awesome sites like CrashPad, all right? There's some really great intentional sites that we're seeing pushed out by queer people what was the woman who was here yesterday who presented, who does pink and white?
Shine.
Yeah, right. Really great porn that they're producing. But this is really mainstream porn, and because I'm talking about mainstream porn, this largely exists within a frame of cis-normative, heteronormative interactions, right? And how this framework fetishizes all of these identities that don't fit into this mainstream white supremacist, conception of beauty. Right? It's a really Eurocentric idea of what it means to be beautiful, and what it means to be a person, right? And who gets to have sexual agency and autonomy. So, sorry, I'm going off this outline too. So if you see me look over here, that's all I'm doing. So how many people here can say they watch porn? Cool. So what are some sites that you guys look at when you guys watch porn? Crash Pad. What are some of the shitty sites you guys look at, or in the past you looked at when you watch porn? YouPorn, okay. Pornhub. Right.
Tumblr.
That's not right. Tumblr is good too. See, I never have the patience for Tumblr, right? So when I was younger, I like had all of my regular Tumblr and then like porn mixed in, and then I had the genius idea to like make a porn Tumblr, but then I got tired of that because there were like all these like gross skeevy guys. But when I deleted that Tumblr, I had like unfollowed all the stuff from my main one, so then I didn't have access to any of the porn anymore. And I was like, shit, like 3 years of collecting and now I have nothing to show for it. This is crap. So I just got dejected about the whole thing, and now just like I kind of search tags and I'm like, this is tedious, right? Because all that comes up first is like those gross bots. So I'm like, this is not real porn. So I have to scroll through that. So I admit in the past, I think the first porn site that I looked at was this site called Booble, and I was in like, I must have been like 13, and I was at summer camp, and someone was like, oh, ha ha ha, I accidentally typed in Booble when I went to type in Google, and I found this porn, and I was like, oh, haha, me too, accidentally Booble, right? That kind of was from there. And so what I found was through my porn experience, I looked at a lot of tube sites, or I would just go to sites like RedTube, Xvideos, and you'll notice these sites that aren't specific. You can go to sites like sapphic erotica, I guess, anything that's like about something specific, or you can go to these tube sites. And these tube sites usually categorize things by tag or channel. So you can go into these different sections. And so what you'll quickly start to notice is that when you're browsing these sites, you can find things that describe an act, the nature of an act, or what's transpiring in this video. What does that mean? So I could look up a video that's rough. I could look up a video, blowjob, deep throat, right? Cream pie, any different thing that I might want to see, right? And these are things, again, that are describing the acts that are taking place in the video. You could also look up things that describe identity. So you could look up things like teen, which is the highest search term in the US is teen. And that's just an entirely separate discussion for another time. You could look up things like chubby, skinny, right? And then you'll see that all these things that describe identity, you'll find things quickly become racialized. Asian teens, Arab, ebony, interracial, reverse interracial, Latina, right? But what you'll find is that these videos that are within these categories are not just describing who's in them, but they often have very specific markers that they're hitting. So it's never just that ebony is just black women. They have some very pernicious stereotypes that you're seeing throughout this porn. When you're looking up porn that's Asian teens, it's this very typified version of Asian identity, usually East Asian, usually young, usually very thin. So this is calling to mind stereotypes we have about what it means to be Asian, right? And a lot of the time within this Occidental framework, when someone says, oh, this is Asian, they mean that this person is Japanese or Chinese, an East Asian person, right? I've heard people say like, oh, I have two friends, one of them's Asian, the other one's Indian. Well, those are both places in, right? So India is in Asia, Kazakhstan is in Asia, right? If you look up Asia on Google, Israel's also in Asia, right? But when people think about what Asian identity means, thinking about a very specific idea and very specific stereotype. So this is why you see things like interracial, but then you also see reverse interracial. So what does this mean? Now, when I'm looking up interracial, something very specific is coming to mind. Interracial as a term, all that it necessitates is that there's people of different races. But if you're looking at interracial porn, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see a black man and a white woman. And then it's not, and that's why reverse interracial is a thing, which means white woman and a black man. You know what I mean, right? A black man. Whoo, I'm stuck on that. A black woman and a white man, right? But when you look up pornography, Asian teens, it's usually with white men, right? When you look up porn that's like Latina, it calls to mind all this like, oh, spicy Latina, fiery, right? So even if you were to look up pornography like by cum in her hair, right, or cream pie. If you were to find pornography that did feature a black person in it, it's going to be mentioned. It's not going to be ignored. It's going to say somewhere in the title, oh, slutty Asian teen talks about blah, blah, blah. BBW black woman fucks next door neighbor. So it has to be a focal point of the pornography. So what does this do? This is my point about how it others non-white identity. So it's reinforcing that there's this norm, right? White people are people, and then everybody else is asterisk. If I'm going in and I'm looking at porn, I can look up rough, I can look up blowjob, I can look up BBW, right? And I can expect to see white people. But if I want to see porn of black people, I have to look up black people. That's not something that's just coming from looking up regular, right, air quotes, regular porn, right? If you want to find that, you have to asterisk that. It has to be a separate category. And then we can tell how these categories are further broken down, right? So if you want to see chubby Asians, that's something separate. Why would chubby Asians not be included with regular Asian teen in this default? Because again, we have an idea of what Asian femininity looks like, and it is very lithe, very thin, and this is very deliberate, right? When we think of idealized femininity, it's about absence. It's about not taking up space. It's about being demure, being quiet, right? You can see this through things like the cult of domesticity and this idealized womanhood, right? And this very pristine whiteness, this chaste identity, elevating virginity, right? And what it means to be innocent. So things that deviate from that will always be penalized, right? So that's why when we're looking at like porn with black women, it's often not centered around this frame of innocence, unless she hits very specific markers like being very thin, being very light, having a certain kind of hair texture. But if you look at a porn star like Pinky, who is thick, has pink hair, right? The porn that she's in is not describing her as innocent. It's not describing her as, you know, a girl who's being exploited, right? But when you look again at porn featuring East Asian women, or porn featuring like brown women, right? It's almost always like, oh, skinny Asian teen exploited, young innocent Asian teen, right? Calling to mind these ideas we have about, like I said, Asian femininity. And then when you're looking at porn about like Latinx women, it's also not usually darker than a certain skin tone, so you're seeing the colorism kind of entrenched in that. And it's always, oh, fiery, spicy Latina teen, and this kind of language we have surrounding Latinx or Latina female identity that's all about being spicy, right? But it's never, again, innocence being exploited. So what we also see with pornography featuring Asian women is that you'll have this one side of the coin that's like this demure chasteness, but you'll also see like this tiger mom sort of rhetoric, right? Wherein she's being dominant, but the focal point is that she's dominant insofar as she cannot be, right? We're not expecting Asian women to be dominant, and therein lies the appeal, right? We're not expecting an Asian woman to be able to dominate us, so this makes it more titillating because it's taboo in a sense. So that's where a lot of the pull is coming from when we're seeing these kinds of porn. And when you like just look through these tags, you'll see that the way they're described, like I said in the titles, will also reference these things. Yeah, anyway. What you'll also find is not just the way certain identities are fetishized, but the way certain acts become incredibly racialized. So if you look at something like cuckold, all that means is that if I'm dating a gentleman, like I said, this largely exists within this heteronormative, cisnormative context. If I'm dating a dude right here and then I cheat on him with somebody else, I've made him into a cuckold, right? So all that cuckold really necessitates is that I have a partner who I've cheated on, and the way the fantasy kind of manifests is that like I'm like fucking this other dude in front of my husband or my boyfriend, right? And it has themes of humiliation and submissiveness and all this other stuff. But cuckold especially takes on huge racial implications, right? It very quickly extends just from like cheating and humiliation to the humiliation that comes from like a white couple and the wife leaving this bubble of whiteness to go out to blackness, right? And it very quickly becomes this like whiteness is pristine and clean, right? And the vulgarity that comes from blackness and black men. And so you'll see terms like blacked, And it invokes this idea that this white woman has this really clean, pristine sexuality that's somehow being sullied by being with this black man. This also goes hand in hand with like breeding fantasies, right? And excuse my frankness, like I said, I did mention I was gonna be frank. It becomes this very like, my big black nigger dick is gonna corrupt your white womb, right? And the extension of this, you can find a lot of comics that very vividly show like a black man ejaculating into a white woman's womb with all these really intense remarks, right? About how she's going to carry his children and what that means for the white race, right? And it very quickly becomes like, oh, I'm going to serve my superior black masters. But as much as it would be cool to have like white people giving me things, it's never out of a desire to like amend things. It's truly just about this typified black male virility, right, that we've seen from slavery. The idea that black men are not human, that they're animalistic, that they're just at a baser level of instinct. They can't operate on a level of humans the way white people can, right? And at the same time with slavery, you're seeing how black people aren't considered people, right? They're not human, they're just animals meant to work in our fields. So you see how within like slavery, there's this discussion of black men in the fields like lusting after this white woman in the house, right? And the Klan was largely established. If you're familiar with the movie Birth of a Nation, right? What happens? These black guys want to rape this white woman, and then the Klan comes in and saves her and saves the day, right? So the Klan specifically was largely created to protect the sexuality of white women and protect that concept of white families. And what it means to be white and like protect that hegemony of whiteness, right? So what we're seeing with these fantasies is echoed, it's the same thing. We're seeing how black men are trying to like take white women because they're so pristine and so beautiful, and they want to make them dirty by way of their blackness. So what we're seeing with black women and white men is this super hypersexualized identity, but really related to like ghetto-ness, and what it means to be black in this very stereotypical way. If you look at videos like White Boys Stomp, it's pretty gross. It's usually a bunch of white guys. It's like a gangbang bukkake sort of video. But all these white guys are wearing like Confederate flag t-shirts and then engaging in bukkake or sex with one black woman, but it's deliberately like very humiliating, right? Which is why they're wearing Confederate flag t-shirts. So when you're seeing interactions between black women and white men, it's never just rough porn. It's never just a blowjob. Like I said, the focal point has to be that she is black, and then all of the things that come from blackness, and the way we perceive blackness to be very ghetto. And what does ghetto even mean, right? And the way we're seeing people act. So largely when we're looking at like black porn and white porn, they exist in really different spheres. A lot of the things that you see in pornography with mainly black people and black actresses is pretty different than what you're seeing with mainstream white pornography, right? Like I said, a lot of black porn guys never take off their shoes or their socks, but you know, that's an entirely separate thing, right? So you're really seeing the focus being on ghetto-ness, hood rat, big butts, right? These sorts of things that, again, are stereotypes we have about black femininity. What's interesting, too, is that when we look at porn featuring Asian men, it's often either Asian men with Asian women, and that's what you see, or you see Asian men with white men within gay pornography. And again, that sort of echoes porn we see with Asian women in the sense that their agency is taken away, right? They're desexualized very much, so it's often very submissive, and it's often going with that theme of being exploited, right? They're usually not as much in control, and again, usually East Asian specifically, Japanese, Chinese, not often seeing South Asian. That would be a separate category. And a lot of these things, especially with like Arab porn, have less to do with whether or not these actors or actresses actually do fit into these categories, and everything to do with how they look. Similar to Islamophobia. Islamophobia doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether you are actually Muslim, but everything to do with whether you look Muslim or not, and what it means to look Muslim. One of my good friends is South Asian, but often deals with Islamophobia because she is brown and looks the way people conceptualize a Muslim person to look. And a lot of my friends who are white and Muslim don't have as many interactions with Islamophobia unless they're wearing hijabs, because they do not look Muslim, right? So we're seeing how these types of oppression are like mapped onto bodies that we more readily associate with being part of these groups. Even myself, obviously I do experience anti-blackness because I'm black, but the way I move through the world as opposed to people who are darker than me is very, very different. And the way people fetishize me is very different also than the way they fetishize people darker than me, right? Anti-blackness always comes back heavier on people who are more closely aligned with these negative stereotypes and negative stigma. Who wants to look up some porn or look up a tube site?
Me.
Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. So.
A tube site, though. I want to pay for my porn.
No, yes, we
should.
should.
You want to go? You want
we should. I do want to get the dirty, grimy, crappy.
Okay.
But
So
we should pay for our porn. That is true.
Okay.
That's true.
So I'm going to Pornhub. What would you like me to look at?
Can you go to tags?
Okay. All right. So what? You want me to just type in tags?
Yeah. Does it have a tag section?
There's like searches, like trending searches and stuff. Do you want me to?
Sure.
Okay. What?
I guess we just want to look at some of the tags that we're seeing online, but we can also just talk about them if that works for y'all. What are you guys feeling?
It would be good to hear.
Yeah.
So okay. So when I just click on the search bar, it says trending searches are Ted Cruz did nothing wrong.
Okay.
That's number one. Okay. Orgy time, Piper Blush, Darren Nova, I don't know what that means. Hot videos in the US are like Black Stepmom, Diamond Jackson, Hardcore Fuck.
First one.
Yep. Squirting GR gets fucked in room. I don't know what GR means.
That's interesting.
Chubby Latina fucked.
Right.
Ebony Star and Aryan Star threesome.
What was the second name?
Ariana?
Oh, I thought it was Arian. I was like, well, that's dark. Okay.
Then there's camp stuff. This sorority sister submission for hazing her will blow your mind.
Oh.
Down the 18-year-old blonde throated hard for facial abuse, but she's white.
Right.
Oh, Jesus.
We don't.
That's just a lot of squirting.
Oh, can I see it? Can I see it? Perfect. So, I guess my point is saying this is that when we look at these sites, right, Black Stepmom, Diamond Jackson, so let's look at some of these categories. Like I said, there are things that describe act. So we have anal, amateur, but you also see immediately under that Arab, Asian, then babysitter, big dick, blonde, Brazilian, cartoon, cuckold, then there's ebony, Euro, Korean, Latina, Japanese, right? So if we were to go into a category that was just college, again, this is all, you guys can't see it, but it's all just white people, right? This is all just white people interacting, right? And the titles are things like riding, extra small teen gets punished after she cheated on her boyfriend, amateur nerdy with big boobs gets fucked, pajama pants, pillow humping, right? So these are just people fucking, and we can of course take this apart. I don't think that this is like the pinnacle of good representation, right? That's not my point. But this is just people interacting, right? And the things that describe them as people interacting. But if we were to go into the category Asian, first, Japanese fuck, two J girls in lingerie provide pleasure to a white cop. Big tilt milk, Brianna Bentley slammed by BBC. Chinese cameraman fucked model at a hotel. Scrambled eggs, HJBJ. That one's weird. I don't know what the scrambled eggs things. Listen, I'm not gonna get everybody's young, but I don't know what the scrambled eggs things mean. Right? Jane Jones, huge natural boobs. Asian gives thick cock guy, a titty fuck. Asian slut, come on, face and swallow. Thank you very much. So, like I said, within the titles, it has to reference that these people are not white, right? So it has to be a focal point. And then you're seeing service to a white cock, right? This like submission to the superior, splendid white dick. So what you're seeing, like I mentioned earlier, with interracial porn, interactions between white women and black men about how this big mandingo BBC dick is gonna impregnate her and sully her, you're seeing very much the opposite with interactions with white men, right? It's all about like the superior white sperm and how it's gonna cleanse you, improve you, make you better, right? How you need to submit to this white dick, right? And usually, like I said, you're seeing this like this language that invokes exploitation, right? There's a site called Exploited Asian Teens, and it's just white guys going around and having sex with usually, like I said, young East Asian women, right? There's also a partner to that, which is, again, Asian men going around fucking, rather white men going around fucking Asian men. But it's always within this frame of like submissive Asianness and this very typified version of what it means to be Asian and what that looks like on Asian women and, like I said, East Asian women and what that looks like on East Asian men. When you're seeing porn that's brown, like with brown people rather, like how many of you are familiar with Mia Khalifa? Cool. So Mia Khalifa is a porn star and she's brown. I'm not sure what country she is from, or what her background is, excuse me. But a lot of the porn that she's in heavily focuses on the fact that she is brown, right? She'll be made to wear a hijab, and then guys will like come in that hijab, but the focus is that she is brown. It's never just that she is a person who is a porn star with autonomy and agency, the way you're seeing like Jenna Jameson or Stoya or these other people interact with porn, right? If you're looking up porn with Stoya, it's pretty versatile, right? Stoya fucks 20 guys. Stoya does BDSM, choking, whatever, right? But it's not mentioned that she's white unless she's interacting with people who are not white. And then, again, it's going to reinforce that ideas about like pristine white sexuality and how she's like fucking these BBCs and this, she's being blacked, right? And all the things that come with that. So we see how pornography is really calling to mind everything we already think about stereotypes. It's not reimagining anything. It's nothing new. Ideas about black female sexuality, ideas about what it means to be an Asian woman, ideas about what it means to be a black man, and having to be strong, right? And having to be virile or having to be superior. These aren't new, right? Porn isn't taking us any further away from the things we already think about black men, right? And that's the risk. So when we're looking at this porn, like I said, within that frame of sex positivity that fails us, it's easy to say like, oh, well, it's not hurting anybody, everybody likes it, it's hot. But what does it mean to describe a black man as brutish and strong? Is this not the same rhetoric we saw Darren Wilson describe about Mike Brown? Did he not say that he was a beast, right? So these things are connected, right? So what does it mean to look at a black man when you're beating off and the porn describing him as like this very virile hung, right? This very idealized masculinity that's devoid of the ability to think rationally, very animalistic, right? And then, animalistic dehumanization. And then we're seeing the same thing on the news with police brutality, right? We're seeing when police are killing black men, and I don't want to focus only on black men because black women die too, right? And black trans women die too. And I wouldn't be me if I only talked about black men. But we're seeing the same things, right? And then when we're looking at the way like black women are treated, a lot of the times we don't have conversations about like sexual assault and the things that take place. And a lot of the times when we do have sexual assault take place, or a black woman is the one who experiences the sexual assault, I want to stay away from using words like victim or survivor because I know people have strong feelings about either, so I just say person who experiences the assault. It's like, oh, well, she was fast in the pants, you know, she was grown, she was too fast, right? So when we're looking at porn that's describing these black women in ways that are very, very hypersexualized, they cannot be delineated, right? They're of the same vein. Nothing exists in a vacuum, right? So we can't just say, oh, yeah, well, the porn's not hurting anybody. Is that true? Right? When we're looking at indigenous women and they're asking to please stop appropriating our culture, please stop making sexy Pocahontas costumes to talk about how 1 in 3 Indigenous women is sexually assaulted or raped, right? Because, in part, we look at Indigenous women and we think, oh, ooh, sexy like Pocahontas, right? So a fetish is an object or anything that you can objectify. That's why you might have a foot fetish, because you're not attracted to the totality of the person, you're attracted to the feet, right? You can like leather. Leather is an object. You can like latex. Latex, again, is an object. So when you're fetishizing a person, it is to objectify them, to make them into an object, right? And that's where the stereotypes come in, this very typified idea of what that identity is. And you only like it insofar as it is attached to those stereotypes, not for any agency it might have, right? You're not looking at this person as a person. You're only looking at them insofar as like, oh, big ghetto booty black bitch, right? Oh, big BBC Mandingo. There's nothing else extra to that. They're not afforded any type of humanity. It's only insofar as this person matches specific stereotypes, So then when you're interacting with these people in real life, these things extend, right? They don't go anywhere. They came from somewhere, they don't go anywhere, right? So it's very, very difficult to delineate. So I think a lot of the times when we're talking about sex positivity, we have to be mindful that these things are real, right? That it impacts the way we engage with other people. It impacts the way we perceive other people and the way we largely move through the world. And so in my own experience, right, when I'm on FetLife, which it's not often, or I'm on any dating site, right, and men from outside of my race try to talk to me, it's almost always likening me to food, right? Something that can be consumed. It's, I can think of like toffee, mocha, Hershey Special Dark, which I was like, there's nothing wrong with being dark, but I feel like you're not looking at me. That's interesting, okay? Chocolate, cookies, but lots and lots of food, right? So again, this is fetishizing, right? And likening black people to things that can be consumed, right? But no one's like going to white women and being like, oh, my beautiful sour cream dream, my Dalbert Daisy, my Cool Whip princess, right? And then from there, it usually extends to things like, oh, well, you know, I've always wanted to try a black girl. That's, I've always wanted to try skydiving, but I guess, you know, different strokes for different folks, right? So it's clear that when this dude is messaging me and he's telling me he's always wanted to try a black girl, he's got things he thinks in his mind he's going to experience by being with me that are different from being with white women, different from being with anybody who's not black. I clearly am going to give him some sort of back pass black experience that's going to be very different from everything else, right? And you'll hear, like I said, people say this about all different types of non-white identity, right? Like, oh, I've always wanted to try a black guy, and these concepts of like what it means to fuck a black man and like how big his dick must be, right? And then being disappointed if these people don't match up to these things, right? That's the risk, is that if I fuck you and you're black, you gotta be the most nastiest, freak nastiest, bucking, naked, slutty bitch I've ever fucked. You have to give me something that a white woman's not giving me, right? Because you're not a woman, you're a black woman. And there's the difference, right? You're not a man, you're a black man. You're not a woman, you're an Asian woman. And those things are different, right? White people get to be people, and again, we all get to be asterisk. I get to be black, something separate. And that means that I have to be giving you certain things that I don't know you've got in your mind. I don't know what, how black people fuck any different than, you know, white people. I don't know what sort of experience I'm supposed to give you. When you say you wanted to always try a black girl, I'm not quite sure what you think. I'm not sure where. I was just gonna take you to Ruth Chris. Oh, you were gonna take me to Ruth Chris. You were gonna take me to Ruth Chris, right? And then I'm not sure what you thought, right? And so, unfortunately, even with, apart from sexualization, right? All my life, when I was younger, I really struggled with it. I was called an Oreo, right? Because I didn't match up to ideas of what it meant to be black. I spoke in a certain way that deviated from people thought blackness was supposed to, right? I moved through the world in a way that people did not expect blackness to move through the world, right? So it was always like, oh, well, you speak so well. Oh, you're so well spoken. Oh, you seem so intelligent. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? And even if we were to unpack that, right? The idea that like, I'm a linguistics minor, so allow me to nerd out for a second, right? There's nothing improper about African American vernacular English. It's got very complex rules, as do all dialects of English, right? But there's this devaluing of blackness, right? And so if I didn't speak in a way that was aligned with like AAVE, people tried to like take my blackness from me and be like, oh, well, you're not really black. Oh, look at like I'm darker than you, right? I'm blacker than you, right? Which I kind of liked when I was younger, and then when I started to love myself, I was like, oh, that's not a compliment whatsoever.
Okay, sorry.
No, fine.
I want to unpack a little bit of what you said in pieces. The first part about sex positivity, because you defined it as being positive about all sex. I don't define it as that at all. So I think we live overall, because mainstream means what is the larger picture. We live in a sex negative culture, right? And we have sex positive porn, but it's a very small niche. So what you're describing in race, I'm nodding, you're preaching to the choir, but if you look at the bigger picture, not just of race, but we're talking about like what you see on the news, when she was reading all the stuff, the whole thing is also rape culture. It's like getting, an underage girl and fucking her. There's rape porn, there's the whole thing of, all of that. So I guess I wanted to just touch on the whole thing, that it's like not just race, and it is awful that it is race, but it's a whole umbrella of what we're, sadly, this is America, this is what the mainstream is. So that was just one part I wanted to share. The other thing being a sex worker, and I don't know if anybody else was in the sex worker thing, but there were a few black sex workers that talked about the whole thing of, you talked about an experience, this guy contacting you, that when they market themselves, it's not an urban experience, it's an exotic experience. Again, because they are sex workers, they are making money, and this is what people want to hear. And when this person was reaching out to you, like, I want this experience from you, this is where they're being paid for it.
Multiple. It is all part of rape culture, and but I'm focusing specifically on race just because the nature of this presentation, right? But I do understand in depth, right, the nature of rape culture, and how like things like misogynoir fall specifically onto black bodies and black women specifically, right, and the way rape culture impacts black people and people who are non-white. I also think that within sex work, which is an interesting point, thank you for bringing it up, a lot of people, because we're a society that likes to place blame when we're looking at things like race play, which is a good segue into talking about race play. People think, well, where does the onus lie? You can't fetishize yourself, right? You can do what you got to do to get a paycheck. I'm not necessarily interested in looking at sex workers and saying like, oh, well, the blame lies on you because you described yourself as like, a big booty bitch, right? You trying to pay bills. I get that. Capitalism fucking sucks, right? So if you are posting your ad on Backpage or wherever that you advertise, and for you're finding that your niche is to describe yourself in a racialized way, do what you gotta do, right? Like I said, do I have thoughts about that? Maybe. But even in my own experiences with sex work, I've described myself as a black person, right? Because that's what's gonna get me money. And unfortunately, knowing what I know about engaging with people who are not white, they don't want to engage me as a young co-ed. They want to engage me as a young black co-ed, right? And I'm increasing my risk of harm when I don't mention that I'm black, because then people are like, oh, you tricked me, oh, you cheated me, oh, you didn't tell me that you were black from the get-go, right? You should have told me that you were black, right? So if I don't mention that I am black, in my experience with sex workers, which have largely been digital, right? It's always like, oh, well, I didn't know you were black, right? And then all the violence that comes from that. So I'm in a position where I quite literally like have to talk about myself as black, otherwise I'm getting even more vitriol than I'm normally getting, right, as an online sex worker, or in spaces where I'm engaging people who are not black.
I just wanted to add, you literally took the point that like, it's like history of like sex work, it's like if you don't mention that they're black and they show up to your door, to your club, and they see you and they're like, you're black, that can lead to violence.
Oh yeah.
They'll
Yep.
get tripped, which is really fucked up. But also, oftentimes, clients don't want to see you. They either don't or do want to see you because you're black, or because, you know what I mean? It's like you're either a fetish or a repellent. It's just how it is.
Oh, right, exactly. You're either something that I can commodify, you're either giving me this experience, right? I want to try a black girl, or
you're black.
oh,
So
black,
it's like,
right. And these very, like, disgusting and pernicious ideas about, like, that we're seeing when people who don't want blackness, right? Like, oh, well, I don't want to see a brown vagina. Okay, I guess that's a thing, right? Cool, I mean, do what you want, right? Fine.
You don't see much of vaginas anyway. You see the vulva more.
Listen, this shit didn't make sense. It is, right.
And it seems to be the opposite with black men and black cocks, you know, like that's what
Oh,
we
yeah.
want to see. There's so
Right.
so much on that versus like
Right.
you know, the only parts of a black woman's body that are like acceptable to see is like, yeah, your
Right.
ass.
Right. And that's why you have to be twerking. You have to be doing things that we associate with black femininity. You have to have a big butt, right? And people will be like, well, what's the point in fucking a black girl with no ass? I sure don't fucking know, right? But you have to be this experience. You have to provide this experience, right? You have to be that liaison to blackness, right? I have to handhold you and bring you in and, you know, twerk and listen to Waka Flocka and just be like, hey, nigga, fuck you doing, ha! Right? I have to behave in this very, right? I have to behave in this very, like, typified version of blackness, and I can't deviate from that. Otherwise, what is it again? Oh, you tricked me. You're not really black. This isn't what I wanted. This isn't the experience that I signed up for, right? Because when you're black, you're an experience. You're not a person, right? You're a notch to be checked off of a bedpost. You know, you're an experience to be talked about later on in the good old boys club with your friends, right? But you're not a person, right? People will talk about, oh, the time you fucked a black girl. Oh, I fucked a black girl and I changed my life. It was not like anything else, right? But like I said, you're not afforded the agency that comes with being a person, right? And if I'm bad at sex, it's not like because I can't suck dick well or because I use my teeth. It's because I'm not giving this experience of blackness, right? I'm failing to measure up to this idea that people have in their minds of blackness. Race play. How many of you guys are familiar with race play? So race play, at its base, is just interacting. I guess I'd say it exists kind of within a framework of BDSM, but that's debatable, you know. I think kind of a lot of things exist within BDSM, but I just like BDSM, so maybe that's just me. But so race play is just like playing around race, I guess. That's the title. But it gets very, very dark, very, very fast. And so what you're seeing is sometimes it'll be with the minority partner as the top. And like within blackness, it'll be always like, oh, my superior black mistress makes me like lick the cum off her boots, right? And I'm like the greatest sissy white slave to ever be a sissy white slave. But more often than not, and I did not do any statistics, so I'm letting you know I pulled this out of my ass, but more often than not, you are seeing white dominance. And so I guess, again, oh, and right, when I'm talking about sex positivity, I think like when we're having conversations socially about sex positivity, not my own definition of sex positivity, right? But I think a lot of the time when we approach porn, people are like, oh, well, it's not hurting anybody, but unpacking what it means to hurt somebody, right? But they say like no one's being hurt in the pornography, so it's okay, right? These are two consenting adults, and so it is fine, right? This is the idea that I think a lot of people have, right? But again, my pushback is saying like I think people are being hurt by this. I think this is adding to a framework of like white supremacy that is already existing. I don't think it's doing anything new for racism. Calling a black man an animal at the end of the day is the same shit we've seen since forever. So within race play, a lot of the time you're seeing it used like cuckold, breeding, right? The things I mentioned earlier about like pristine whiteness. And with white male tops, you're seeing a lot of really intense control of blackness. You're seeing a lot of direct fantasies involving slavery, master, having stables, right? A lot of more animalistic dehumanization. And so I guess when I'm looking at it, my limit is like, if you want me to fuck you and you want me to call you my master and you want to call me Sally Hemings and you want to call me the N-word, I'm not understanding how after we're done fucking, you're turning that off. I'm right, and I didn't put a lot of the really darker stuff in here, but you are more than welcome to go on Tumblr. It is very easy to find really, really intense exploitative stuff, like Asian hunters, right? And a lot of really heavy emphasis on slurs. I'm not going to use slurs that are not mine because they're not mine to reclaim, but a lot of really intense anti-Asian slurs, a lot of really intense anti-Latinx slurs, right? And you're seeing a lot of like exploitation of youngness specifically, right? It's not just like older black women or older Asian women. It's usually like very young brown women, very young Latinx women. And when they're described, a lot of the people running these blogs are white men. When they're described, it's like with this very intense eagerness to please whiteness, right? This very intense eagerness to be cleansed by whiteness. This very, very intense desire to like deviate and being like, oh, well, Asian men can't fuck me because they can't fuck, right? This is what we're seeing with the desexualization. So I want your superior white dick, right? So oftentimes it's coming in tandem with a lot of like really violent stuff, and like violence is cool. I like BDSM. I love violence. Choke me, that's fun. Cool, as long as it's safe, sane, and consensual. We got some safe words. I'm down for a little bit of slapping. That's fine, right? But the nature of these fantasies are very brutal. Like I said, consensual non-consent is fantasy that people have. That's something else, right? And that's whatever. But you're seeing very intense like language about rape, but rape used as an act to cleanse these people because they are savage or because they are dirty, and ultimately stemming from the fact that they are not white.
There was recently an op-ed piece about the whole race play in a public setting, in a club. And
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking
So I do social media for a sex positive group, and that was one of the articles that I decided not to post because I felt like even the discussions about it might be more harmful to the people of color in our community. But I think that it's important, even if you like, okay, that's not your kink, my partner and I want to consensually play that, that's fine, but you don't inflict something potentially damaging on an audience who hasn't agreed to it. Right.
And I think that's, even that is unpacking what it means to be safe, sane, and consensual, right? Who's consenting to this scene? Obviously, people shouldn't be doing scenes in public where you're not in a space, like if you're at a play party, cool, right? But not like just at the mall, like walking your slave on a leash. That's not a thing that anybody should do. I don't know if anybody told you guys that, but I am telling you now, right? If people are in this scene that haven't consented, that's never all right. So if we're thinking of the same thing, and I do believe we are, just to give a brief overview, there was some sort of competition or a contest like show. And there was a white top and a black dominant. Cool, that's fine. But they proceeded to engage quite publicly in a scene where there was like a plantation backdrop, and he was like whipping the sub, who was also, due to the language, like boy, right? And there's a lot of complex stuff surrounding like black men and being called boy. And so everybody was like, this shit is whack and not all right. You can't go up and like be calling someone master and having like plantation art up in the background. Did nobody tell you that? And ultimately with race play, people are gonna do what they wanna do. I work in harm reduction, right? So I'm not telling people what they can and cannot do with their bodies necessarily, right? If it is something you wanna do with your partner behind closed doors, oh, okay. Right? I'm not there in the bedroom with you, right? I'm sure I do a lot of shit that people wouldn't want to see or think is wrong, right? I just told you I wanted to get slapped in my face. So like I said, I'm sure I do a lot of things that people think is bad or unfeminist or misogynistic, right? So ultimately, if your greatest fantasy is to be called the N-word while you're like sucking off 3 guys, okay, right? If that's what you're gonna do, okay. I'm not in a position to tell you what you can and cannot do, right? I'm usually more side-eyeing your top who's calling you the N-word while he like punches you in the stomach, because that's a little iffy to me, but you're gonna do what you're gonna do. But when you're engaging in public, that's something very, very different. Like I said, you should never be playing in public and doing scenes where people haven't consented. But when you're forcing people to look at this like very intense racialized trauma, that's trauma, right? I can definitely say, and maybe this is because I already am interested in BDSM, if I'm at the mall and I see someone being walked around on a leash, that's upsetting to me. But if I'm at a play party or I'm somewhere and I'm seeing someone like calling someone Sally Hemings and calling them the N-word while they're fucking them, that's doing something very, very different to me. Right? That's very, very intense and very, very isolating, right? I can say like, oh, did you see that crazy shit? You saw that man with the girl on a leash, right? But if I'm seeing someone like calling someone the N-word and fucking them, I'm like, I'm going home. That's not right. So, right, that scene was very not okay. And I think that's what happens with race play. A lot of the time, in my experience, when I've been at play parties, when they're doing the space rules, they'll say, you're welcome to do what you want within this framework, but understand certain things are going to be triggering for other people. So maybe if you have like really intense consensual non-consent fetish, don't do that here. Maybe this isn't the place for that, right? But I think people need to be mindful. If you want to engage in race play, that's something to do on your own time. That's not something to do at the play space. That's not something to do at the local dungeon unless it's race play night, right? And that's something that you've organized, right? But when you're exposing other people, people have sure consented to being in this BDSM space, and they've consented to like maybe hearing that lady get flogged over there, or like seeing your needle placing from the periphery. But race play is something very, very different, right? Like I said, do I like needles? Not so much. But if someone over there is doing wax or needles, I can't just walk away. Right? I might not be into like electroshock, and if someone pulls out their magic wand, wand, I can just kind of walk away and be like, oh, okay, kind of skews me out, right? But if someone's doing this really intense, like exploited Asian teen, wear a schoolgirl outfit, call me your great white dick master while I'm calling you anti-Asian slurs or anti-Latinx slurs, that's a very, very different experience. Questions?
So one of the things that bugs me about the whole situation as a white woman commenting on race just is weird to begin with. But because of the nature of privilege and oppression, when it's a white top and a black bottom, especially when we're talking about the pornography industry, I do have anxiety about how consensual can that situation ever be.
I'm glad we're talking about the big shit now. I'm glad. I wasn't sure how down y'all were to bring out the big guns, but that's true. We cannot delineate things from systems of oppression and systems of power. And so I also, these things are so,
Especially when there's money.
these things are so grisly to like wrestle with. I'm glad you're gonna do this with me, but right. So, like I said before, okay, if we're looking at sex work, I can't fetishize myself, but like how consensual is it? And this is also very dependent upon the kind of sex work you're doing. If this is like survival sex work, or this is different kinds of sex work. Like I said, the sex work that I've engaged in has been digital, and it's been like for side money, right? Whether that's meant like selling my underwear or just like talking to guys online, JOI kind of stuff. But I've not been in a position, speaking frankly, where I like needed the money that I was working for. It's always been for extra. So the positions that I've been in are very different from other sex workers, right? Because sex work is a very, very dynamic thing, right? And my threat for harm has been real, right? People can find out where you live from the internet. They can dox you, right? But it's been very, very different than people who are street-based or people who are like getting into cars with other people, or people who sugar, or people who are like physically in the presence of the people that they are engaging in the sex work with, right? So my risk of harm has always been less like bodily violent, less like directly violent to my person, and much more to like I said, people can like find where you live and come there, right? But it's been a little bit different than other sex workers. But I do wonder ultimately how consensual these things can be, right? When you're looking at a white top who's approaching you. There was a panel that took place in my hometown almost a year ago, and it was all about kind of being not white and engaging in BDSM. And they also mentioned a scene wherein they were at a party and it was a white top, and this is specifically like a master-slave dynamic, and he's like whipping this boy publicly. That's really complex, and a lot of people were not all right with it. And in the scene, were they talking about race? Not necessarily, but as we all know, race is in the room even when they're not talking about it, right? It's always going to be a thing. People look at me and they see a black person, right? Like, again, not a person, a black person, right? I always will be that other. I always will be that asterisk for my deviation from whiteness. And granted, I personally am afforded a tremendous amount of privilege for being light-skinned and for my proximity to Eurocentrism. But at the end of the day, I am a black woman, right? I'm a black person, right? Black femme. So the ways I'm engaging with like white people, and the ways like white people have power over me, even without explicitly having to say they have power over me, are like very, very difficult things to interact with. And I think at the end of the day, when you're looking at these interracial dynamics, it's really, really difficult to, like I said, move that away from existing systems of oppression, right? And the way like a white top engages a black sub versus the way a black top engages a black sub. That makes sense. Wow, I'm really thinking about, oh gosh. I know, right? Like, you know, when you're trying to like process, right? But it does, I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable to see these things, right? Because you've got a lot of questions in your mind when you're seeing a white top engage a black bottom, or even a white top engage a non-white bottom. Let me speak in that way, right? I think I speak a lot from blackness because I'm a black person. I don't want to co-opt other people's experiences. But I wonder, like with attraction, right? How much are we really attracted to skinniness because we're really attracted to it, or we've been conditioned our whole lives to be attracted to it, right? So if you have your white top and the interactions you're having, he's calling you like black baby girl or stuff, like how much do you appreciate that because like he's your top, and how much do you appreciate that because like all your life you've been conditioned to like prioritize whiteness and appreciate the attraction and attention that comes from whiteness and be validated by that in a way that blackness like can never validate you, right? How much is it really authentic? Like if we were to really peel back those layers, is the whiteness not part of it? I don't think that it isn't. I don't think you can ever really say that, right? Like, and like I said, I've suffered from white boy thirst in my past, right? And for me, a lot of it did come from the fact that I thought white men would give me validation, right? I really did think that like the attention that I got from white men was superior to the attention that I got from black men, right? I felt like that was a prize that made me better, right? And those are the things that I really, really wrestled with when I was a lot younger. And like I said before, I loved myself and my blackness. And so in all the attraction that I had to like white men, it really couldn't be separated from the fact that I had really favorable views of whiteness and what attraction meant from like white people and white men, and what it meant to be a person who was like appreciated by white men. So when I'm looking at people who are in interracial relationships, it's just very, very complex. This doesn't mean that you can't be in them, right? This doesn't mean that like you're not really in love, right? It doesn't mean that you have a bad relationship, not so by any means, but I think these are like complex things that people have to think about. And like I said, in my own experience, that was a large part of my attraction to white men, and a large part of my not being attracted to men of other races was because of images I'd seen of other men and associations I had with like Asian men being desexualized, right? Which is why people can even fix their lips to say something like, I don't date black women, or I don't date Asian men, right? Because again, dating an Asian man is an experience. You're not dating a person, you're having an experience, right? And there are certain things that are going to match up with this experience and certain things that are not. And so if I sit and I think the experience of dating a black girl is going to hit these markers, and yes, I do want these, then I will proceed to engage in this experience. And if being with a black girl is going to hit these markers that I do not want, then I do not want to date black women, because they're going to be too loud, or they're going to be too ghetto, or they're not going to know how to act when I take them in public, or they're going to have a butt that's too big, and I don't like big butts, or right? I don't want these experiences. I don't want to have this experience, right? Which is, like I said, people really get really angry when you tell them that's racist, right? If people say like, oh, I'm just not attracted to black women. Have you met every black woman? Because me and all the black women in this room don't look alike at all, right? Me and all my black friends, I mean, maybe some of us look alike, but like we don't look alike at all, right? There are black people with freckles. There are black people who are way lighter than me, right? Who are still black. There are black people who are way darker than me who are still black, right? So when you say you don't want to date a black girl, that clearly means that you're associating something with blackness, something with black femininity that you do not want, right? Which you're saying without having ever met all black girls, right? Because again, it's that experience. So when you're saying you don't want to date Latino men, you clearly think there's something that comes with dating Latino men that's across the board. No matter which one you date, every single one you date is going to bring you this experience. Every single black girl you might encounter is going to offer you the same experience as every other black girl. And if you want that, yes, I like black women. I like black women, right? What does that mean? Or I do not like black women, because they're all going to give me the same, only one, like, omna experience.
So talking about white tops and black bottoms, and talking about cis men and cis women, how does it change when we're talking about gay and lesbian relationships?
Right. So I think that the ways people are sexualized not only depends on their identity, like the way black men are sexualized, but also their sexuality, right? Black gay men are sexualized in a different way, right? But you're often also seeing that, like, ghetto boys, right, inner city, right, if they're interacting in a way that's interracial, like, my beautiful superior white dick is going to save this inner city boy, right, and give him money, and he will be grateful to me for what I'm giving him, right? And a lot of the time what you're seeing, which I spoke about a little bit earlier with like Asian men and white men, is again this super submissiveness being prioritized, right? I'm going to exploit you, and that's the only reason I'm interested. So things change greatly whether we're looking at gay men and women, and trans women of color as well, the way trans black women interact in porn. And even though I'm speaking specifically about race, anybody who doesn't fit into this thin, young, white ideal is going to be fetishized. If you're looking at porn featuring people who are transgender, it's always going to mention that they're transgender. That's not the word that they'll use, right? But it'll also all the time use words like trap, tricked, right? The T-slur, right? This idea that, like, I wanted to be with a woman and you tricked me, right? This is a trap, right? The entire, like, your identity as a trans person is only existing insofar to, like, trick me and seduce me, right? Not, like, you as a person who is trans, right? So you're seeing how that's fetishized as well, and the way that works in tandem with being black, right? So then a title would be something like, young black T-slur tricks white man she meets at bar, right? But that's always the focal point, right? I've never in my entire life on any mainstream porn site found a piece of porn that featured a transgender woman that didn't mention that she was transgender, and didn't do so in a way that was like disgustingly dehumanizing
and like inherently violent.
and inherently violent. And that's what we're seeing a lot with this with porn and race. And I don't want to talk about them as if they're separate, because trans women of color exist, right, and are bearing the brunt of this violence, of this sexualized violence, right? But it's very, very violent. And yes, a lot of porn is violent. A lot of the ways, right, dirty next door slut punished, right, that's still violence, right? But you're seeing she is a trap, she tricked me, and now I'm punishing her for it. That's
And
what
like,
the sex
I have
is.
the right to do
Right,
that.
right. Because I'm entitled to her body, right? I'm entitled to, and this is what I mean. It's all
Wrong.
right. It's all fun to be like called Hershey Special Dark, but things that are consumed have no rights, right? I'm entitled to consume Hershey's Kisses because they're food for me to consume. Their entire existence is for me to eat it, right? For me to grab it as I see fit, right? A Hershey bar can't talk. A pot of molasses can't talk. A mocha latte can't talk. It exists for me to gain sustenance, right? It exists for me to enjoy myself. So you're seeing these like very violent methods of consumption in this porn, right? And I'm able to be violent because I can, because I should. Right, I should be violent to you. I should teach you a lesson, right? This very like really punitive stuff. So the sex in and of itself this could be an entirely separate discussion, right? But the sex itself becomes like this very punitive and violent act, right? Meant to put you in your place, right? Which is, like I said, a lot of what you're seeing with white tops is putting you in your place, fixing you, cleansing you from the inside, making you better by way of like my superior whiteness, and also punishing you for not being clean already. So we're all out of time, but thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for coming.